My name's Alex Scott. I'm the branch secretary of Together Queensland. We're doing today's webinar in relation to the Return to Office program and the individual flexibility arrangements within the Queensland Public Service. There will be the regular virtual union meeting for public servants next week, but today's is just in relation to the Return to Office and Flexibility Arrangements program, and it will be available as a recording after today's session. So in terms of that, we apologise that some people have only got, we sent out emails about this previously, but we understand the text this morning has been delayed by our provider, and we're apologising if people have got that quite recently. In terms of today, we wanted to work through where we're at with the Return to Office program. Hopefully people now should be able to see the shared screen in terms of that. In terms of this, we do have a couple 150 to 200 people expected to be online today, so we won't be able to answer all your questions through the chat. We will try and make that, try and cover them as we can, but there will be, we may have to in some places come back to you in terms of that chat function. So in terms of the Return to Office program, what we do know in terms of where we've been over the last year or so has been kind of thinking through the close down last year. We went from the COVID lockdown beginning of kind of early mid last year, and then when things started to settle down, we started on the graduated Return to Office program, where there was kind of statements made about 50-50 and a bunch of other changes. And then in the second half of last year, in October, we then sought commitments from the ALP as part of the state election in relation to exactly what would happen in a post-COVID world in relation to the future of work, but also in terms of working from home and in relation to the future of the kind of suburban hubs in terms of kind of seeking to reduce the footprint of the state government in terms of the CBD as part of their savings and debt plan. So those commitments were achieved by union members in October last year. They then became government policy in January this year, when the election commitments from the ALP were then taken to cabinet, so then therefore became government policy. And then more recently, in terms of 2021, we then had a series of announcements by the Premier in terms of some media and also a statement to Parliament, and also some decisions in relation to the Public Service Leadership Group, the leadership board that was articulated by Rob Setter, and a kind of cut and paste document was then provided to individual departments as to the Return to Office. That Return to Office was particularly focused in relation to the need to get the coffee shops in the CBD profitable, and certainly in terms of the Premier statements in relation to what they were looking at was in relation to trying to then encourage private businesses in the CBD, lawyers, accountants and such like, to increase their the number of their staff who are returning to the CBD. So that's really where we've kind of the history of where we've got to in terms of that. What we were trying to work through in this process is to, while responding to what the employer is doing, is to make sure that we were also trying to work through as workers what we were seeking to do during this change process, and what delegates had signed up to in terms of our broader strategy. And I think that's important as we talk through the strategy of what we're trying to do is make sure that we've identified what the goals and objectives are. I think it's really important in terms of also talking about that we are not seeking to return to 2019, that in terms of what we are seeking in terms of the way that people and public servants undertake their work, their ability to have a flexible work arrangement and a balancing of work-life family, that we were seeking to return to a new normal rather than to 2019. I think there are some significant issues around workplace health and safety, particularly for vulnerable workers, about what a COVID means. But, and I don't think we are post-COVID yet, particularly in relation to events over the last couple of days, particularly in relation to football matches in Victoria. But But irrespective of that, at some point we will be in a post-COVID environment, and we want to establish a new norm for what is the way public sector workers undertake their work and where they undertake it, which is different from 2019, which takes into account the successes of working from home arrangements during the COVID lockdown, and both in terms of workplace flexibility, but also some very significant improvements in relation to productivity, and understanding that while there were significant obstacles in 2018 and before in relation to the ability to work from home, those arrangements were smashed as a result of the crisis in terms of the COVID lockdown, but also that there was significant learnings occurring in the public sector and in other workplaces about how new technologies could allow for a very different way of working. So in terms of that, what we really are seeking in part of this process is establishing arrangements moving from 2021 and beyond, when we're in a post-COVID environment, which is about having a new set of norms around the ability to work from home, and to have that in terms of a series of new industrial rights and regulations about working from home. That in terms of the ability to convince local managers in 2018 and before, it was very difficult to get approval to work from home. You had to have extraordinary circumstances. The vast bulk of public sector servants in the CBD were able to work from home during COVID, and they found that a much better work-life balance. But we are seeking as a strategy to make sure that you start to have much greater ability to demand the ability to work from home. And rather than relying on the same decision-making prism that existed in 2018 and before in relation to work from home arrangements, setting up a new set of industrial systems and regulations that will mean it is easier for workers and union members to get working from home in a positive way, which recognises also that there is the significant benefits for both the employer and the employee in this regard. So while we want to achieve working from home as the new norm, we also want to be able to look at a different set of industrial regulations and rights than currently exist. And so in terms of that process, what we are seeking to do is that is the broader strategy about not only achieving more rights for people in terms of those people who want to continue working from home, maximising those hours available to people to do that, but also then to seek to move that into a different industrial environment and different industrial regulation process. So what have we seen in relation to the employer response to the Public Service Board announcement and also the government announcement has been very different, and that we have engaged collectively and got feedback from members with every government department in relation to what their plans are to implement what are quite nebulous decisions in terms of this process. So there was the unions were consulted about a possible 80-20 rule. That was rejected, and there wasn't an 80-20 rule, but there was a decision made that says that the standard arrange that the expectation would be that unless people are otherwise working from home, they'll be working from the office again. So that's been very differently interpreted by different agencies, and those good employers are being quite flexible in relation to this and are saying that they want to continue to take advantage of the significant benefits for them in relation to work from staff working from home. And they're looking at a variety of combinations, up to 50% or more of people being able to exercise up to 50% of their time working from home. So that's a bunch of departments, some of them bigger departments, some of them not always are traditional good employers, but Education Queensland's been reasonably sympathetic in this regard. Environment and Science, Natural Resources, there's a range of agencies who have got different rules in different places, but there is there are certainly a significant number and potentially a significant number of work in terms of total members affected in that bunch who are saying that they want to continue to move to formalise the arrangements for working from home through flexibility work arrangements, individual flexibility arrangements, which is part of the industrial framework that exists under the Industrial Relations Act as it currently stands. That people will be working from the office, but they will be wanting to have as many people as possible, where appropriate, fill in individual flexibility arrangements to provide them with the ability to continue working from home where it works for them and works for the employer. So in that circumstance, there is some pressure in terms of formalisation of those paperwork, but we're reasonably confident that there are large numbers of employers, particularly at senior management level, where the government announcement won't result in significant numbers of changes to number of days being worked. There'll be some at the margin, but there won't be a wholesale change. Then there are some bad employers in this space, where employers are making decisions where they're trying not to document them, which saying, oh, well, we're going to go to a rule that says 80-20, and that nobody will be approved anything more than 1 day. So particularly through word of mouth, particularly in the smaller agencies in 1 William Street, there is a strong narrative being provided, which says that as a result of the government decision, executive management team, whatever they're called in different departments, have made a decision that every flexibility arrangement will be determined in the same way, and that all you can ask for is 1 day. And that you are rocking the boat if you ask for more than 1 day. And we've had some examples already where people have been knocked back for flexibility arrangements because they've asked for 2 and they're being told it's equitable to only give you 1 because 1 is the standard rule. So that is the kind of the other extreme in terms of the response rate, where there is an attempt as much as possible by the employer not to put this in writing, but to continue under the broad umbrella of the Public Service Commission decision and the Public Service Board decision to say, we want to encourage flexibility arrangements, but then at a departmental level convince people that the flexibility arrangements are limited to only having a standard response. You're either working 1 day a week from home or you're not working from home at all, and there is no shades of grey, there is no flexibility, there is no variations to that. So those are where we're at in terms of that process. We notified of a dispute through the Industrial Relations Commission for one department last week, which got earlier this week. There was the department's response at that stage was they're just doing what they're told by the Public Service Commission, and there's no need for consultation because the Public Service Commission was responsible for the central consultation. So that dispute will be escalated to a central-wide dispute, but that is really just about the nature of the consultation process rather than the decision-making process. What we're seeking to do as part of this process is move from the individual to the collective and move them collective into a new framework of industrial regulation to provide not only more chance for people to work from home at the moment, but also to make sure that we can then try and get that changed in terms of the industrial regulation process. What that really means is that we will be seeking in the medium term to show that the individual flexibility arrangements which are in place under the Industrial Relations Act aren't the best way of managing the way that return to office and balancing work-life balance should be done. Because they're both a short term, but they're also the exception to the rule is almost by the definition of what an individual flexibility arrangement looks like. That isn't the long-term solution that we feel in terms of the ability to provide workers with a real chance to have working from home arrangements, but also there needs to be a collective industrial framework for that decision making. So there are some of our members who'll never be able to work from home. Protective security officers, by their very nature of their work, youth detention workers, a range of our members never have the ability to work from home. So it is legitimate for the employer to say some work can't be done from home. But there is a bunch of work that's been proven to be able to be done from work from home during the COVID lockdown that should be capable of continuing to be able to be done. In terms of that, there will be a mix in terms of some people will be, in terms of that, some return to office, and in terms of what that looks like as a percentage. We need to make sure that there is an appropriate balance made in terms of that choice, but also that choice is equitable, that if 5 people all apply for it, with similar grounds, that there isn't levels of nepotism and favouritism, that some people get work from home because they're friends with the supervisor and other people don't. So there needs to be a change of the balance around saying work from home is normal, but there also needs to be a decision-making framework that provides for equitable outcomes when there is a work unit where multiple people want access to work from home, but the employer plays favourites. So that needs to be addressed in a different industrial framework than the individual flexibility arrangements that almost promotes that level of inappropriate behaviour. But to get to that, we need to move through a phase of individual flexibility arrangements and then move to, at the other end of the program, to the new industrial relations regulation process. So in terms of that, we are wanting to make sure that people continue to engage in the flexibility arrangements discussion and make sure that they actually ask for that process in terms of what that looks like. And in terms of that process, then being able to engage with the employer to see what is that process, and then having, once we've had that applications made, what we need to do is that people actually ask for what they want. That in terms of creating a new public service and a new norm in relation to working from home arrangements, in those agencies where there is real flexibility, with those agencies which our employers are not being unreasonable, we need to make sure that people put in their flexibility arrangements as an initial stage to make sure that we can document them, so the employer isn't required centrally to require everybody to return to the office unless they've got a flexibility arrangement in place. That's not the final stage, but that's an important stage. But more important is in those bad employers, we need people to actually ask for what they actually want. Our ability to move collectively in this process will be, we will be having the flexibility arrangements put in place through the agency consultative committees, through the regular meetings the government requires that Director Generals have with us. We want to be able to then get a report from all employers as to how many people applied, how many were approved, what that looks like as a generic mix, in terms of people being able to have multiple different days in terms of work from home, particularly in the CBD-based and the office-based work, which is more capable of being done during the COVID environment than the public protective security officer youth detention type role. And once we've got that, we can then have a collective conversation, agency by agency, about what the employer's behaviour has been like, and then looking to formalise that decision-making matrix either through enterprise bargaining or through award variations or the such like. But in terms of that, there is going to be those departments where workers want one thing and the employer wants something else. But in terms of being able to prosecute a collective conversation with workers in those circumstances, we need to be able to make sure that we are in a situation where we're saying workers want X and it's being knocked back, as opposed to the employer, in the worst case scenario, if they bully, intimidate and convince people to only apply for 1 day a week and only apply for what will be approved, that in those negotiations with those departments, those negotiations will go along. We will say, have you been reasonable? And the employer will say, well, unlike every other department, we've only ever had anybody ask for 1 day a week and we've approved every request. If that is the outcome, it'll be very difficult for union delegates and union officials to be able to prosecute an argument saying they're a bad employer because they've knocked people back if they've never knocked people back. If people never ask, we will never be able to be in that situation of showing that there needs to be change and that their behaviour isn't appropriate. This will also be true in some of the bigger agencies where we're seeing, particularly local management in particular, work units or in particular divisions, having a position which is very different to what the Director Generals are saying in those higher level discussions. The Directors General are saying, okay, we want to be flexible. Local management, particularly who are poor supervisors, want everybody in the workplace so they can eyeball them because that's the closest they can get to supervising them. They will be trying to get people to do flexibility arrangements that suit them, that don't actually suit the worker. So in terms of this, there will be a point in this area where the only way we will achieve a new norm is if, as part of a collective campaign for that, workers ask for something. If workers don't ask for improved in terms of working from home, that won't occur. and we won't be able to show in terms of that process moving forward that there needs to be a real change. So I know that is challenging. I know that in terms of that process, we will have supervisors saying, don't ask for it, don't rock the boat, whatever. What we know is if people never rock the boat, we never get improvements. And in terms of this, we do need to be saying into this exercise, does our strategy in terms of being able to establish a new norm does require individual applications. You need to put those in as real applications. And they need to be on the basis of your personal circumstances and working out why it is reasonable to say that you are showing that you are productive, that you have been able to do this work historically for the last 18 months or so from home. So there's no technical reason. You're not a protective security officer. You're not a youth detention worker. This work can be done from home. So that is the kind of binary quest about, could this work be done? It's been done already from under COVID. It's already being done from home. It was potentially being done last week from home. Then the question then is about the personal circumstances, why it would work for you in terms of that exercise, whether it's spending less time on the train, work-family balances, but particularly focusing on your work-life balance and why it is good for you as an employee to be able to work from home, and you've been able to show that you've been just as productive, and that's why you want 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, whatever you want. Put that ask in and show in some detail in relation to that this will make a difference to you as a person, and that is why you want to pursue this. And then some people will get approved, some people will get knocked back, but we need to be pushing the envelope to have more people asking rather than less in that circumstance. The one big group that is different to this is vulnerable people. And while I've been talking about the kind of up till now has been about what it looks like in terms of the post-COVID environment, establishing a new norm and a new series of industrial regulations in relation to working from home. That's about balancing productivity and good outcomes for the employer with the ability to have a work-life balance and spending less time on the train and more time at home in relation to workers. That is a specific circumstance that we want to achieve for 2022, 2023 and beyond. The Public Service Commission advice and departmental understanding of the next part has been confused, and that we are not in a post-COVID environment yet. That there is lower risk now than there was 12 months ago in terms of the situation. But we've seen from what's happening in Melbourne in the last week that we are not at herd immunity yet. We still have risks in relation to COVID. And there are people who are at much higher risk in relation to vulnerability than other people within the workplace. And those people are not about saying that they want to have work from home because of they want to spend less time on the train, they want to spend more time with their family, all those other reasons about individual life choices. There is a significant component of workers who need to be working from home because they have underlying medical conditions and they are in a situation where they are more vulnerable to COVID. And so therefore, from a workplace health and safety risk component, that is why they should be working from home. They are the only people who should be saying, and if you do have an underlying medical condition, that is a very strong argument that the employer can't reject. And in terms of that, that would then require, if you are going to have that argument with the employer and put that argument forward, you will be asked to provide evidence about that. Depending on, some employers will take your word on it, others might say they want some detail about it. But that is legitimate at one level to say, if you are going to claim that you have a workplace health and safety issue, that you have to provide some documentation about that. That doesn't mean everybody who wants to spend less time on the train and more time at home needs to provide medical evidence about the work-life balance question and the question about 2023 and 2024. Those people don't need to provide medical evidence. There's nothing to say that those things are appropriate. And everybody who puts in an individual flexibility arrangements doesn't need medical advice to do so. But for that segment of the membership who are in that vulnerable working environment, that they are the ones who have greater argument for working from home. The flexibility arrangement is about them, and that is about the COVID arrangement. And they are less, in terms of what that looks like in 2024 and 2025, hopefully we will have herd immunity and COVID will be a thing of the past. And the ability then to say, I have a workplace health and safety risk, I can't come to work, will be negligible at that point in time. And it will be just then about getting the balance right for workers between productivity and working from the office versus productivity working from suburban hubs versus productivity and work-life balance from working from home, and ensuring that we have more ability from work from home because it makes our lives better. That is a different thing from the vulnerable worker piece. So that has been confused in some agencies. You don't, and in terms of that process, talking about where we need to be really is then about the kind of question around medical advice is just limited to the vulnerable workers, and that's a different decision matrix required for the employer because we're triggering the workplace health and safety advice. But in terms of the people who are not in the vulnerable worker situation, but are seeking working from home to be maintained for productivity, for work-life balance, and because of that process, which is part of the broader union campaign for better industrial regulation moving forward, they don't need that medical process moving forward. So really what that means is we are still halfway through this exercise. You will continue to get some information from the employer, depending on which department you're in. Some of that will be legitimate, some of, particularly if it's not in writing, don't trust it. If you are being told that you've only got 1 day a week available to you and anything else is rocking the boat, or if there's been decisions made by management, that flexibility will only be done by a single day off arrangement, let us know. But we'll also be needing workers in those environments to put the applications in. So in terms of what the next couple of weeks looks like, the timing of those individual flexibility arrangements is going to vary a bit in terms of those deadlines. We'll be still continuing to prosecute the broader consultation argument through the Industrial Relations Commission. But in terms of agency by agency, all the agencies are agreeing to meet with us at the agency consultant level and or at the Director General level. Some agencies, some of the small agencies haven't got the ACCs in place, and we're just meeting with HR, with delegates in those circumstances. But what we'll be seeing is encouraging workers to put in their flexibility arrangements, hoping that they don't take, that they actually ask for what they want, not ask for what they're told to ask for. That will then give us a pattern of behaviour. We will then engage with the employers collectively to see what that looks like in terms of their agency. And then the key question then comes in is saying that just because the department might have a kind of 80-20 preference in terms of a total number of employees, that doesn't mean that it's 1 day per week per person. That means that some people might have 5 days a week in the office, some people might have 3 days a week in the office, some people might have 1 day a week in the office. That is true flexibility. And then we'll be seeking to see whether those decisions are being, that there is flexibility about that in terms of allowing more people to work from home, which is consistent with the ALP commitments, which are now government policy, which was to say they would develop targets to say, as a minimum, the number of people working from home and the number of people working for suburban hubs should be increased, and have a target as a percentage of the hours worked. And then developing a decision-making matrix that allows for real flexibility, but also equitable outcomes to make sure that that management's behaviour in terms of making sure that there are differential outcomes based on real circumstances, but also that there isn't nepotism and favouritism in that space. So that may require some appeals through the Industrial Relations Commission. We're hopeful we can avoid having to do that. We're hoping that we'll get a collective set of negotiations about a revised decision-making matrix that will provide appeal mechanism into the future. But we want to be doing that through a collective environment rather than through an individual environment, even though the initial round will be through the individual flexibility arrangements, which do provide appeal rights to the Industrial Relations Commission. That'll be one of the things we may have to look at in terms of that. But in terms of that process, that we'll be able to work out through the that exercise. So in terms of that, I think hopefully we will be able to have covered most of your questions today. I did say we were going to try and keep it to half an hour. For everybody who's attended, we'll send out a feedback email, follow-up email, so that if you do have questions in that process, we can engage through that. But the main thing is encouraging you to put in applications for flexible work arrangements. We do also have some union posters to put up to encourage other people to put up there, put in applications for individual flexibility arrangements. And in terms of that process, also making sure that you let the union office know what's going on. Don't assume that just because The employer has sent out an email that someone's told the union office we can only work with the office and with delegates and with members where we know what's going on and engaging with that in terms of that process. And if you do get knocked back, there is the part on the website where we'll be asking you for that process, and then working through both at a departmental level and then an escalation level about what that looks like. Some of those department knockbacks will be legitimate. If you're a protected security officer and you put an application in for work from home, you're going to get knocked back. It's going to be making sure that we change the narrative and make sure that we are able to prosecute the best cases to establish new case law in this regard, but then we'll be supporting people through that process, both at the agency level and at the central level. But in terms of the ones we then engage with, we'll also be seeking to do that in a collective sense rather than one by one on the agencies, so we can work that through and have the best case possible, but also ensure that equability argument as well. So there'll also be some further information coming out to members, as well as the Zoom next week for the virtual public service report back. We will be doing some feedback to members on an agency basis, particularly with those departments which have been most problematic in terms of that process, and working that through for everybody. So in terms of that process, if we haven't covered your answers today, I know we've had quite a bit of chat in the question and answer section. We'll try and get to those today, but we'll certainly send out a follow-up email for everybody where we'll provide that individual advice and assistance. But if you don't ask, it'll guarantee you get knocked back. So the main thing is, please make sure you put an application in. If you're in the vulnerable area, we can help you with that bit. If you're in the other non-vulnerable section, make sure you ask for what you want. Don't get bullied into intimidating into it, but also please talk to your workmates in your department and make sure that as many people ask as possible, because that will give us the strongest possible case to win the collective argument initially in your department, but also to make sure we can then move to a new norm for the public service with better industrial regulations that'll be more than just the individual flexibility arrangements we've got till now. So I'm sorry we've gone over time a bit, but thank you everybody for your time, for participating. Please stay involved. Please tell us what's going on. Please make sure you put those applications in.